Artificial intelligence could be the most transformative technology that we've ever witnessed in the history of humankind. The changes that we're about to experience can be more drastic than the changes that our ancestors experienced when the internet and the fire was invented. But I want to talk just a little bit more about change in general. So can I get a raise of hands, how many people have experienced change in their life? And keep your hands raised if you've ever felt anxious about change. All right, of course, it's a very easy question. We've all experienced change constantly. If you've been in EO, that's kind of the constant as well. And we all naturally feel a bit apprehensive about change, right? Because it moves us from a familiar situation to an unfamiliar situation. So let me get a little bit more specific and ask you another question, relating this change to AI now. Put your hands up if you feel completely comfortable regarding the changes that AI is having on your life in a personal way or professional way. You feel completely confident and you're embracing it, you do not feel anxious at all. All right, I see a few. But so for those who didn't raise your hands, the good news is that studies show that at least 1 in 3 adults feel this type of anxiety regarding the changes that AI is bringing into our life. And that's completely natural, right? Because naturally we tend to be a bit apprehensive about change, and that's because change comes with a certain degree of uncertainty. Now, neuroscience tells us that the brain perceives uncertainty as a physical pain, and therefore we instinctively try to avoid it. And that's what breeds resistance to change, something that hits organizations all around the world. But I've often felt that when confronted with change, we spend a lot of time in the anxiety phase of change, instead of learning to embrace it in a more readily scale, right? We spend a lot of time in that stuck, confused, anxious state. So what I want to do today is share a personal story of mine that my mother and I went through, and a journey of change that we went through, and what we learned from this journey of change. Now I want to use these insights to apply to how we can better navigate the changes of AI, but I do believe that the insights I'm going to share with you can be applied rather broadly. So feel free to use these insights and apply it to any change that you might be going through in your life. So this is Mama and me in Cape Town, South Africa. And my story starts about 5 years ago in Cape Town, South Africa, where I was living alone with my mother at the time, and I got the opportunity to study in Europe for 2 years. So a fully paid scholarship to study in Europe. And that was an incredibly exciting opportunity, right? Anyone would jump at that opportunity. However, it wasn't that easy to just pack my bags up and leave. Because you see, my mother has something called facioscapulohumeral muscular dystrophy, and that can be abbreviated to FSHD, so that no one's forced to pronounce it, and also because EO loves acronyms. So what this is a rare genetic muscular mutation that affects the muscles. So at the age of 19, my mother was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, and naturally her muscles deteriorated as times went by. So that meant that from an early age, my brother and I acted as a kind of extension of her arms and legs, as she relied on us for most physical activities. And talking about struggling to get out of bed in the morning, for me it was a daily struggle, for my mother it was a daily struggle. So we were both in for some big changes, right? I wanted to go abroad, and we needed to figure out a situation of how I could do that but still take care of my mother. So naturally, when we are faced with change, right, we often go through 2 phases. We have resistance to change, and then we eventually have acceptance. Now, a very good way to understand this is with the Kubler-Ross Change Curve. Now, Kubler-Ross was he is a Swiss-American physicist who created this theory of change along the change curve in 1969, and it's been used by organizations all around the world. Initially, it was the phases of grief, and now it's been used to understand change. So that relation is pretty interesting. But notice how in the beginning aspect, the resistance to change aspect, it's all emotionally triggered concepts, right? Shock and denial, often sparked by anxiety. Then we have frustration, then we have depression, right? It's a very emotionally based curve that we have when confronted with change. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the journey of change that my mother and I went through, and I want to plot it along this graph and show you how we navigated all the different phases. So let's start with shock and denial. So obviously my mother, hearing the news about me going to go study abroad, was putting her in a difficult situation, right? She relied on me for most physical activities. So I thought, how can I go and study abroad in Europe but still ensure that my mother was taken care of? And of course, I went to a full practical solution mode. Every single change I was proposing was a practical-based solution, right? Could my mother come with me to Europe? Could we send her to a caretaking home? Could we get a care facility to come to her place and take after her? I was so focused on the practical solutions that I completely overlooked the emotional feelings that my mother might have been going through, right? Nevertheless, the fact of not being able to rely on her son, but losing her son for 2 years to go to Europe. So I couldn't understand why she was so resistant to every single solution I was proposing. We seemed to knock heads on every turn, and we slid down this curve rather fast into frustration and depression. So it was completely frustrating for me, it was frustrating for her. I perceived the situation as her not being open for me to explore the world and have this amazing opportunity. And to her, it was me abandoning her and moving over to Europe. So it became a very frustrating situation, and eventually we slid down into the depression stages. And it was through those vulnerable conversations that I realized that my approach to the situation was completely wrong. Not only did I neglect the fact that that change is an emotional journey and we need to recognize it as such. There's a very big danger when you do not recognize it as such. But I also found that I was robbing her of the opportunity to decide on her own future. Every decision that I was making was forced upon her. She was not in control of that change. So every decision was my decision, and that's why we were bumping heads so much. So through changing the narrative and putting her in the center of that change, she started to become more open to the change. She started suggesting her own ideas, something she calls better ideas. And eventually it changed. We moved the process from being incredibly frustrating to her being very open and embracing the changes. It became energizing. She started to integrate these changes, experiment with different solutions, and eventually it led to acceptance. And I'm very happy to stand here today and tell you that in January, at the beginning of this year, my brother and I managed to pay off a house for my mother in South Africa. We managed to make the house completely disability friendly, which means that she's not only almost fully independent, but she's also a lot more happy in her current situation. So what did I learn from this journey of change? Well, before this, number one is that mom's always right, as she likes to say. Another one is that change is an emotional journey. No matter how much you focus on the practicality or the logistics, change is emotional, and it gets very dangerous when we overlook that aspect. Next is autonomy and control is the key to overcoming resistance to change, right? We respond better to change when we're leading change rather than when it's thrust upon us. So those are the two lessons that we learned. And I find that had I learned that at an earlier stage, had I been listening more, we could leapfrog over those shock, denial, frustration, depression. We spend way too much time in that anxiety and frustration stage. So if we can apply these insights, we can leapfrog over the resistance part and more readily move into experimentation and acceptance. So what I want to do, and again, please apply this to your own journey of change, if that's helpful. But what I want to do is I want to retake a look at the Kubler-Ross Change Curve. But now I want to plot how these insights can help us with the changes we're looking at when we have AI. AI is moving at an incredibly rapid pace. And I find that generally when we're confronted with AI, we have shock and denial. Shock and denial, as is the case with my mother, is mostly sparked by anxiety. Something I like to call AI anxiety. Because it's a cool concept and also because I'm a little bit nerdy with AI. So one of the biggest reasons for our anxiety within the world of AI is because it's uncertain, right? But mostly the biggest complaint is that AI will take our jobs, right? This is by far the most common reason for anxiety within the way that AI is moving. And it's not unfounded. Historically, in the history of work, we've always seen how technology has replicated our physical activities, right? We've seen this on the factory floor with blue-collar workers have been replaced by automation. But now we're seeing something rather different. No longer is technology only replicating our physical activities, but it's beginning to replicate the work of the mind. Skills that we thought to be uniquely human. So when we see large language models like ChatGPT come out, it's the white-collar workers that are also running. And I think that a big problem we have over here is that we are as a mindset shift, right? We view AI as a AI versus humans approach, but I don't agree with this approach completely. I think that it's much more valuable to have an AI for humans approach. Yes, AI is going to take some jobs, it's going to change a lot more, but I don't believe we'll see mass replacement of jobs. I more think that change is going to be the dominant factor over here. And To move it forward, if we can overcome that anxiety, right, by understanding that it's a collaboration within AI, we can move forward. But there's still the frustration and depression. Because when we move forward, there's a lot of barriers. AI is moving at such a rapid pace, it's almost impossible to keep up. So it breeds frustration. But if it makes you feel better, imagine how ChatGPT must feel having to deal with humans every day. Maybe that makes our frustration a little less. So, as I said, speed. Technology is moving at such a crazy speed. There's probably around 5,000 to 10,000 AI tools that are coming out weekly. It seems impossible to catch up. And as the photo shows, it's like drinking out of a fire hose, right? It's an incredible speed and we just cannot keep up. And generally when we perceive the AI tools as this big mountain to climb, right, generally we just tend not to climb it. But I think we need to be careful not to fall into this all or nothing approach, right? We do not need to have all the technical skills to begin that climb. There's a fantastic book that's called The Digital Mindset, What It Really Takes to Thrive in the Age of Data, Algorithms, and AI, where they talk about this 30% rule. The 30% rule is borrowed from English in an international organization, just like EO is. And they talk about how non-native speakers only need the command of the English language of 30% of that of a native speaker. Now, we can apply the same principle to becoming a digitally AI-enabled workforce. We only need about 30% of the technical skills of digital literacy in order to fully participate as a digitally AI-enabled workforce. The rest of the 70% comes from collaboration and working with people who possess different but complementary skills. And another factor, talking about control and us being in control of the situation, is inclusion. We need to feel as though we're part of the process. And a very important thing to note here is that any technological strategy has to be aligned with a people's strategy. We need to feel that we're in the center of control over any process that's going on in order to create buy-in. That's how we overcome that resistance, right? Just like moving my mother into the center of control over the changes that she's experiencing, the same is true for any change that we undergo in your personal life or within any organization. And lucky for us, this is actually one of our values, with a little bit of a spin on it. Together we grow. We can do this together. So I hope that we can demystify the anxiety that we experience with our journey of AI and try and exert more control over it. And if we can get that right, I too think we can leapfrog over the resistance to change that we commonly see with AI and more readily jump into experimentation, integration, and acceptance. Now, when we talk about experimentation and integration, we need to foster a lifelong learning, something I think and I believe that EO does very well already. Psychological safety is something that's very important over here. We need to be able to fail and learn from it, right? Failure is only a failure if you learn nothing from it. And the culture of curiosity and experimentation is important for us to progress. But of course, this requires that we constantly reanalyze the skills that we need in order to progress. There's a fantastic report by the World Economic Forum that says that by 2025, 50% of all workers will need significant reskilling and upskilling to adapt to AI-driven changes in the labor market. And that's like just now. That's in a couple of months. And the big reason for that is because job skills have a shelf life, right? According to IBM, this is about 5 years. And obviously it depends on what skills you're talking about, but skills do have a shelf life. And we need to readapt those skills in order to keep up with where we're going in technology. The skills we need today are not the skills that we needed tomorrow, and the skills we have today is not the skills we needed yesterday, and the skills we need tomorrow are not necessarily the skills that we need today. A typical example of this is prompt engineering. So I did this about 2 weeks ago, entered prompt engineering as looking for jobs, made the location in the United States, and I was surprised to see 777 results on prompt engineering as a job. Now, I don't believe that prompt engineering is necessarily a job, it's more skill we need to use. But you can already, if you analyze LinkedIn, you can already see a lot of these qualifications coming into the qualification section. Experience in AI prompt engineering, content creation, expertise with Claude, ChatGPT, and other similar tools. It's becoming very prevalent in the skills that we need. So we talked about experimentation, and now we can talk about integration. Integration is there's a bit of a barrier to integration, right? I think we need to steer away from what is called AI tourism. AI tourism is where we bounce around with different AI tools in a very superficial way. We don't actually integrate them into the processes within our daily work. And the bridge over here is between AI exposure and AI adoption, right? There's a big gap over there, and that's the integration gap that we need, because curiosity does not equal confidence. And lastly, I'd like to leave you with these words that just as though I found that my mother was a lot more happy when she embraced AI, so too do I think we can be a lot more happy when my mother embraced the changes she was going through. I think that we as an organization can be a lot happier in the work we do if we embrace AI. Because imagine a future where we can outsource the automation, or outsource the mundane tasks, the redundant tasks, the repetitive tasks, the admin tasks, all to AI, and we can focus on what truly matters. We can focus on creativity, we can focus on critical problem solving, and we can focus on strategic development. Can we not then draw more purpose and meaning in the work that we do and be more happy? And lastly, on your flights home today, some of us have a fairly quick flight, others have sort of 30, 40 hours, but take some time and think of what is the emotional barriers that is preventing you from embracing AI, and how can you exert a greater control over your AI journey? Because you don't need a specific title, you don't need to wait for the perfect time, and you don't need any permission to start your AI journey. You only need the courage to start with where you are and with what you have. Thank you.